Jennifer.
Thank you, Marion. Thanks. You can always guess the topics by which portions of the Torah I choose to read. And today, in this portion, there are so many different lessons, so many very good concepts and ideas and inspiration. But I've basically chosen three. And firstly, of course, it's always about Moses and his leadership. But having studied the rabbis, both Zichronom Livracha, deceased, and alive, it's amazing how in this era, the modern Orthodox, Reform, conservative rabbis seem to speak with one voice. And basically, there's three stories. First of all, we said Moses' leadership. But what the rabbis are particularly talking about in this century is the amazing role of women, because the name Shemot only talks about our patriarchs, never mentions women. And yet, without woman, and I don't like this man-female dichotomy, I don't like that division, and we'll see in the end how we can be one. But without the particular woman in that era playing an inordinate role, in an era where women were right across the world, subdued, almost a possession, it was the norm. We have women leaders playing a great role. So, let's see who the women were, and I want to quickly mention their names. I believe, if I remember correctly, Marion, you probably won't, last year, this time, on Zoom, I mentioned only the two midwives, but I'm going to mention now quite a few women without whom there would not have been or would not be a Jewish nation. The first one is Yocheved, wife of Amram and mother of the three people who were to become the great leaders of the Israelites, Miriam, Aaron, and Moses himself. If Yocheved, at the height of the Egyptian persecution, had not had the courage to hide a child, to hide him for 3 months, and then to put him in a basket, she threw him on the river as the woman had been told to do, but she put him in a basket, there would have been no Moses. Where would you and I be? What faith, what ideas would we be following? So I found that of great interest. So, yet her first appearance in Torah is unnamed, unlike the names of all the patriarchs. And really, what is this telling us? It's really not important who are the main names. What is important is who are the main players. Very, very interesting. So that's number one. Without her courage, without her initiative, ingenuity in how she did throw her child in the river but saved him, we wouldn't be here. Number two, of course, is Miriam. We know that. That was Yocheved's daughter and Moses' elder sister. Look what she did. She watched the basket. She was the one who ran to Pharaoh's daughter, not knowing it was Pharaoh's daughter at that time, and saw the compassion in her eyes and offered to get his own mother to nurse him. What an extraordinary factor. So, there's also a very funny story I'd like to share. I don't know if you remember, I shared it before, that Amram, her father, led the Israelites. He wanted them to divorce their wives so they couldn't sleep with them and they couldn't make babies so the men wouldn't be killed. And Miriam, his own daughter, says to him, "What's wrong with you? That means there's going to be no births either, no woman either." She said, "You're going against the will of God. You cannot do that." And she talks him out of it. So she had more faith than the father. And without her, even there, Moses might not have been born because she'd already was born. So already we've mentioned two great women. The third and fourth great woman we know are the two midwives, which we have spoken about before, Shifra and Puah. They frustrated Pharaoh's first attempt at the first genocide of a people. Now, of course, there's an argument, it always is in Judaism, or let me put it this way, a discussion. Do the Hebrew words mean they were Hebrew midwives? You could see the interpretation I read today said that, but other interpretations of the Hebrew say definitely not. They were midwives to the Hebrews. In other words, they were Egyptian. Again, I suppose it depends on what point you want to prove or your agenda, which one you choose. We go with great rabbis in the past, including Maimonides, who says the interpretation is they were definitely Egyptian midwives. And therefore, their refusal to obey an order of the king was unheard of. Everyone had to obey his orders, Jew, Gentile, Egyptian, doesn't matter what. So, very, very interesting. And it says they feared God. So we now know that the presence of God of goodness is available to all humanity, even those amidst our enemies, as we only saw too prophetically in the Holocaust, when the righteous risked their lives against the orders of a hateful, horrific power and dictator, Hitler. So, this has given us the idea that there are moral limits to a power, and it's called civil disobedience. The first civil disobedience or public protest in Torah was by these two women, Egyptian women, who went against everything that was being accepted around them and the greatest power, because the king in those years was considered divine. So this is quite amazing. Right, we're up to number 4. Number 5 is Zipporah, Moses' wife, the daughter of a Midianite priest. In those days, depending on who you married and what you thought you were, you automatically became converted. And she was determined to be with Moses on his mission to Egypt, despite the fact she had feared to risk her own life. So it's quite amazing. And she was the one who circumcised their son, exactly as the Jews had been commanded to do. So I find this is all intriguing. And then, of course, the sixth, and perhaps one of the greatest women of all time, was a daughter of the enemy, Pharaoh's daughter, who had the courage to rescue an Israelite child against her own father. She disobeyed her father, the king. And I mean, it's amazing. And can you imagine a daughter of Hitler or Eichmann or Stalin doing the same? What prophetic examples our Torah gives us. And this really happened. They found archaeological evidence to prove this. I think this is amazing. This Egyptian princess. Look what we owe to her. Look what we owe to the others, because Hashem is with everyone. We don't know who she is, but later they give her the name of Bitya, B-I-T-Y-A, and our sages identify her as the woman who saved Moses, and sometimes the name is Batya, meaning daughter of God. So, the sages drew a great lesson from this. And the Holy One, blessed be he, this is what tradition says, said to Bitya or Batya, Moses was not your son, yet you called him your son. You are not Jewish, my daughter. You are not my daughter, but I shall call you my daughter. again, very prophetic, that our Torah shows us that our God, Hashem, is the God of all people who fight for justice, who want justice, who help another, even in the extreme case where their own life is endangered. And of course, we've got many, many great women Jewish heroes. Deborah, in a time where we know that was not only a judge, she led the people into battle. We've broken all the rules as Jews in terms of the norms of men and women and other things. Hannah, Ruth, Esther in the Bible. And today, modern figures like Anne Frank and that magnificent diary she wrote, never gave up hope in the face of Esau. Hannah Senesh, you've heard so much of her and read so much of her beautiful poetry during our Shabbat services. And of course, Golda Meir, this incredible woman leader. But in our Torah, it's pointed out that there were prophetesses. So after the era of miracles, where there were prophets which had to warn the people, and by our actions we had to create the miracles, there were also prophetesses, not just prophets. So ultimately, men and women really are just human beings who do the right thing. So I just wanted to share that with you, which is quite extraordinary, the role that women have played, both non-Jewish and Jewish. Otherwise, you and I wouldn't be here in the service this morning. All right, the next point I'd like to share is, as we've heard, they didn't obey orders. And neither should you or I. Well, I mean, South Africa is renowned. I'm not going to go into it. We can see in the recent unrest, it was civilian population who took things in their own hands. And right now, we've told a government that was not leading us, that was full of unjust, full of corruption, okay, it's enough. We don't want you anymore. We're voting you down. But of course, the story still has to unfold. And each of you in your way, I know, stand up and do the thing that is most difficult every Thursday, going to Hillbrow, battling to help other people who are incapacitated or lonely. We all do our best, and we know that. And we should as well. So that was the other point that comes out of this drosha, that if there is a conflict between the words of God, of Hashem, and the words of a king, a president, even one of our own rabbis maybe says something we don't like, we've got to stand up. Remember that Abraham even argued with Hashem, and Hashem made him do that just to show that justice is the most important concept, not following adamantly and firmly one way and hurting others. So, okay, I won't go into all the rest of it, but it's very interesting that in the Middle Ages, by the way, the church had great power, and they forbade the translation in the vernacular of our Torah, and etc. It was only years later when the printing press came about that one Christian took it into his hands in 1525 to translate the New Testament, and they killed him. The Christians in charge killed him because the Torah says clearly that you cannot respect a sovereign if his actions and words are against justice. And if there's hurt and injustice in the world, you've got to go against him. Can you believe it? They try to prevent that. But of course, it was actually printed. And ultimately, this is what inspired America, because the Pilgrim Fathers left England because they had the King James Version, which didn't show that concept in its true nature. very interesting to think our Torah and that one act of defiance by these two Egyptian midwives has come the basis of justice for the other, and even so, the basis of the American Revolution against the existing government at the time. So that's enough about that. And of course, we know that God blessed these two midwives and took them in like his own children. And they had many followers and many family, and they were great. Okay, so just to be a little bit intellectual at the moment, before we finish with one great act of Moses, is that in most other religions and most other ideologies, particularly in Greece was supposed to and it has had a great input into philosophy and the understanding of mankind. But the Greeks chose tragedy. For example, the one example in Antigone, a Greek play, her brother goes against the king, their father, and the king kills him and orders that he cannot even have a decent burial. And his sister goes against the father and insists on giving her brother a decent burial, and she was killed. That's the answer, tragedy. But in Judaism, no. The midwives were not killed. No one was killed. We survived the tragedy. And we're still here because Judaism, above all, is a religion of hope. It's a religion of faith in the abilities God has given him, created in his image, by following justice, by standing up. We will see it tomorrow. Yes, may not be our generation, it might be the next. Yes, it wasn't everyone. Many were killed in Auschwitz, but the Jewish nation survived to bring this message of life. Our God is a God of life and hope, not of tragedy. We see past the tragedy to a better tomorrow, a better future, depending on the goodness of God, of the creation, and each other. Finally, the one act that Moses is renowned for, and I read that sentence to you, and that's the final, not the final, that is the concluding message from Hashem to us. It says that when he saw an Egyptian killing an Israelite, there was no one there, and therefore he took action. What does that tell us? This is something great rabbis, many rabbis, both modern and of this century and before, have said that this is a total example to us that when there is no one else to correct an injustice, when Moses saw he was alone, there was no other man there, he had no option but to intervene and kill the Egyptian who was killing an Israelite for no reason at all. And therefore, it is definitely the responsibility of each of us when we see injustice being done, doesn't matter how small it is, and I believe it's to all God's creatures, be it to another person, be it, doesn't matter, color, creed, religion, race, not important, or be it to one of God's creatures. We have to take action. We have to open our mouths. We have to speak. We have to be there. We have got to be a people of life that saves lives and has faith and hope in overcoming all the mistakes and adversities we're going through to achieve a better tomorrow for everyone and be a light unto the nation. Shabbat shalom, and thank you. Back to you.